Hi there, and welcome to Everybody's National Parks, a podcast dedicated to family adventure in our national parks. I'm your host, Bryan, along with my wife, Danielle.
Hello. We wanted to take this first episode to tell you about some of the themes we'll be talking about in the coming weeks and months, and where this idea came about. Bryan, would you like to start there and tell our listeners how we came up with this idea?
Sure. Well, there's a few elements to this. I think the most basic element is, like a lot of people listening, we had a basic relationship with our national parks through chiefly a visit we went on back in 2002, where we went up the West Coast, starting at Petrified Forest, Painted Desert, up to Bryce, Zion, Olympic, Muir Woods, and it was a great trip. We, at some point in the trip, discussed, wouldn't it be great, and I probably prematurely on my part, wouldn't it be great if at some point we have kids, that we would replicate this, or we would introduce them to our national parks, our country, the different areas of our country, deserts, rainforest, redwood trees. Wouldn't that be a great thing to do with our kids? Well, here we are with two little girls, ages 7 and 4. We're now just at the point where they're old enough that they have some independence. They can go out on their own a little bit, that we can have a full vacation, and we don't really have to worry about them so far holding us back too much. So that's where we are right now. And I think the second part, which crystallized why a podcast, was we went on a trip to Disney World. And I know it's ironic where this is a national parks podcast, and I'm mentioning Disney World here within the first few minutes, but we had a great family trip, wouldn't you say?
It was fantastic.
So it was
definitely
great.
not what either of us was anticipating having so much fun. We thought it would just be kind of annoying.
Yeah, but some of that was because of the planning, and we had a lot of help. Blogs, podcasts, the usual media that everyone uses now when they want to take a deep dive in a particular subject, we had access to. And my joke was, if you throw a rock at the internet somewhere, you're going to hit some middle-aged parent who was going to give you their opinion on how to navigate Disney World. And so we used some of it was useful, some of it wasn't useful, but we used that, and we had a great trip. Now, roll the tape forward, and planning out trips as we always thought we would for the national parks. And there's some things out there, some great Twitter feeds that we'll talk about, but we saw really no podcast. And so we thought, well, wouldn't this be great if we can do this? Now, again, that leads to kind of the third element, which gave us this idea of, all right, now why a podcast, but why a podcast with an active family, and which I think is how we would define ours. So, Danielle, do you want to talk a little bit about the IMAX film that we saw?
Yeah, so I'm sure many of you have seen that film. I think it was called National Parks Adventures, and it was stunning, really beautiful, and watching it on a big IMAX screen was incredible. It's 3 people traveling all around the various national parks. I'm not sure how many they hit, but they were real adventurers. I like adventure. I like biking and swimming and hiking, but these folks were really elite athletes. I don't know that I would call myself an elite athlete.
Speak for yourself.
Well, I don't see myself anytime soon going ice climbing in Michigan in January, which was in the movie, and or rock climbing in Devil's Tower. I'm just not that daring. But it was really gorgeous, really inspiring. It made me want to visit parks. However, when we walked out of the theater, I said to you, you may remember, Bryan, that was awesome, but I didn't feel like it was accessible to me. I don't see myself going home to go plan a trip to do what they did, which I guess it was cool to see a movie, to see things that I would probably never do myself. But I also would have enjoyed seeing things that I may actually be able to replicate in my own life.
Right, and I agreed with you. Again, it was a great film, and everyone should check it out. And nothing but respect for the three characters in the film, who again are elite athletes. But you're right. I think the average active family, and I think it would be fair to say, Danielle, we're not. And again, respect to these folks as well. We're also not the type of visitors to the national park that are going to view our parks from the windshield of our car, right?
No, we get out and do stuff.
Right. So there's that happy middle of an active family who's going to go out, get off the main drag through a park, and get out on the trails, right? And try to stretch themselves a little bit and see what they can see. Go for a hike. Go for a swim. We'll talk about this for Virgin Islands National Park. Go on a snorkeling trail, right? We're going to do some of those things. But you're right. Ice climbing in Michigan in January. Again, all respect in the world. That ain't us, right? So that was the third element. And one thing I wanted to go back, I wanted to even wind the tape back further with you, and because I think this is a very good point, is did you want to talk about your time in the Peace Corps and why, when you came out of the Peace Corps, your first thought was, one of your first thought was, I want to go on a trip out west to the national parks. Do you want to, because I think that's an interesting point to make.
Sure. So a long time ago, I did the Peace Corps in Madagascar. And during my time there, I managed to see most of the country and through the national parks and also visiting villages and towns throughout the country. But my first experience with national parks was really visiting the national parks of Madagascar, and so different throughout the country. It's the fourth largest island in the world, really magnificent, had so many amazing adventures, saw so many beautiful things, and incredible experiences. And after my service was complete and I came home, I felt like I need to see my own country. I really haven't seen very much of the country besides, a few places. And so we planned this trip together. And Bryan mentioned it earlier on, and we used the money I got from Peace Corps to readapt to home, and used all that money to go.
Yeah, we burned through that. We did a good job.
To travel and camp and get to experience the national parks and see a lot of our country that we had never seen before.
So that's interesting. There is an old saying that sometimes the best way to view your own country is from afar. And I think it's interesting that your entry point, and we can talk about this a little bit more about how you grew up, but your entry point in some regards to the national parks was through Peace Corps Madagascar. I think a lot of our listeners are going to share some of our sentiments. I think it's probably fairly unique, although there's maybe some folks who have lived abroad who've come back home with a ardor and passion for the national parks. But I think your entryway through being in the on the east coast of Madagascar with vanilla plantations and lemurs, that somehow that was your gateway to the Painted Desert in Arizona. That's a pretty neat journey. So I think that's interesting. And along those lines, when we go back to our Disney World example, do you want to talk about your friend who, and we won't name names here to get her in any trouble, but she's, I believe, a travel agent of some sort, a private travel agent for the Disney World properties. Did you want to tell her about the story, or tell her about your review when we got back from Disney World and what she had to say?
Yeah, so I told my friend all about our trip. As a family and myself, just personally, I enjoyed it way, way more than I ever anticipated. I was kind of nervous about the whole thing because I thought it was going to be a big headache, but we had such a fabulous time, such a blast. The kids had an amazing time. And I came home saying, wow, what will ever top this? I don't know how. I understand how people go to Disney World annually because it's so much fun, but I don't want to do that.
It's built around service for the kids, right? So they obviously they know the parks know those Disney parks know what they're doing in terms of hitting all the pleasure zones for your kids.
Right, and making it easy to travel as a parent as well with your family. Anyway, so I'm recounting all the details to my friend, and I said, I don't know how we'll ever top this. And her response to me was, well, you'll go someplace real. And I thought, oh, yeah, how silly. We'll go see the world and our country.
Right, and that again, this is all kind of the genesis of well where we are with this podcast and where we are with our travel plans with our kids. But I think now it's probably interesting to talk about where we live and where we are from. So I'll set the stage here and let you do the big reveal. But the National Park Service has a theme, a program, which I personally think is a good one, which is Find Your Park, hashtag Find Your Park, right? Which I interpret that as look at these parks are big, they're myriad. You can spend weeks and weeks and weeks, and you'll still never see the same things. You can go in different seasons. So the idea is if there's a national park near you or one that you like to go to, visit and revisit and really take a deep dive in that park, which I think is wonderful. So that all being said, Danielle, do you want to talk about where we're from and where we live?
So we are both from Long Island. I am from not far from New York City. And Bryan, do you want to say where you're from?
Sure. No, I'm just from the other end of the island. So I'm from the east end of Long Island, a place called the North Fork of Long Island.
And Long Island, if you haven't visited, it is very flat and very far away from any national parks.
Right. I mean, there's a national seashore there. There's Sagamore Hill, Teddy Roosevelt's home, but
lots of historical sites.
Right, but not one of the 59 national parks. So the irony is, in terms of Find Your Park, if one would argue, if we were going to do this podcast, probably we should be residents of Salt Lake City, right? Because I'm just off the top of my head, that's probably the best city to live in with access to various national parks, the ones in Utah, the Pacific Northwest, Yosemite. In some regards, I think living on Long Island, we are as far away from the national park system as one can live in the United States, right? So, and the other end of that is we have no park bias, I guess. So we're not, as we're not folks who live in Boston who are going to spend a lot of time extolling the virtues of Acadia, although Acadia is great, and we did go there at one point. And we hope to be able to go back and talk to you about Acadia. But for us, we don't really have a park in our backyard. So we're coming at these parks with open eyes and no bias, and we're excited to see different parts of the country, different from Long Island. As much as we love Long Island, we're excited to see other parts of the country as well. Mountains, right? So things that we, Long Island, if there's a little hill about 3 feet off the ground, I mean it's pretty much a mountain to me growing up. So this is going to be exciting.
Before we talk about some of the parks we'll be visiting, Bryan, I think it would be really interesting to tell our listeners about your role, your particular unique role with parks in general.
Right. I don't want to overstate it. So by no means does this mean I'm a ringer by any point. But we have a passion for the parks, and where we live on Long Island. Back in 2008, I was asked to be a commissioner for state parks on Long Island for New York State Parks. And about a year or so after that, I was elevated to become chairman of the Long Island State Park Commission. So I have that position now. It's an unpaid position, and mostly I serve as an interlocutor between the public and our parks professionals and the state parks folks up in Albany. We raise some money. We have a foundation. So my night job is I'm running around a lot. I was just up at Jones Beach, which is probably our most famous state park we have on Long Island, next to probably Bethpage. If those of you who are golfers and know Bethpage Black, that's a famous public golf course that's had the U.S. Open in '02 and '09. So I understand, and I'll try to bring some perspective, but I don't want to overstate this. I'll try to bring some perspective from park administration as well. So I understand where there's park operation deficits, right? Because we're struggling with some of the same things in New York State parks. But I also understand the power of investment in parks by public entities, by public-private partnerships. So I'll bring some of that to the table as well. We're going to talk to some of those people. And finally, with that perch, we end up talking to the National Park Service. We end up talking to some of the people who are key stakeholders in our national park system, as well as our state park system in New York. So we're hoping to be able to have some of those people contribute to this podcast as well. But again, I think everyone should think of me as just just that slouching towards middle-aged dad with two little girls, and we want to get out and about in our country. So that's going to be the majority of my perspective.
That's a good lead in. Why don't we tell people about some of the parks that we'll be talking about in upcoming episodes?
Right. Well, yeah, our ambition is, maybe we'll end up hitting all 59 parks at some point. But right now, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So the first few parks that we'll be talking about Shenandoah National Park in Virginia, Zion out in Utah, Virgin Islands of course, in the U.S. Virgin Islands in St. John. We'll be talking about Rock Creek Park in Washington, D.C., which we think is a hidden gem in the national park system in Washington. Most people think of as they should, right? The mall and the Lincoln Memorial and Washington Monument, and as they should. But there's a huge wild park in the middle of Washington, D.C. that we think people can take advantage of. And, of course, the big one is Yellowstone and the Tetons in December. We're looking forward to building out several episodes, not just based around our trip, but just based around Yellowstone and hopefully the whole Yellowstone ecosystem. So that'll be the first several episodes you'll hear from us. And we think, as of right now, that the basic structure of the podcast series will be you'll hear trip reports from us when we're going. Either we're going as a family, or for Zion, I went with my high school buddies. So you may be hearing from some of my high school buddies about our trip to Zion. You'll hopefully be getting some background, some tips around visiting the parks, again, from the perspective of an active family, what to do with children, what the junior ranger programs look like. And then, again, whatever background we can give you, I'm looking forward to really taking a deep dive into that Yellowstone ecosystem. Again, as a guy from Long Island, I want to hear about the wolf issue in Yellowstone. I want to hear about winter in Yellowstone. And I want to hear about, again, goes back to maybe my gig as a parks commissioner. I want to hear about some of the tension, frankly, between the public in Yellowstone, the people who live around the park, and some of their practices with management of the park. I want to hear about that because I think that's also an important perspective for families to have, that these parks don't exist in a vacuum by themselves, that they're coexisting in our country, in our society. And I hate to say it, but there's going to be politics around it. There's going to be policy to have to think about. And I think that just makes one a more informed visitor when they're visiting the parks and wondering, well, why are there wolves in this particular park, but they haven't been reintroduced in, let's say, Rocky Mountain National Park? And I think that's something that's going to be worthwhile digging into. But we'll take it from there. And again, we're hoping to hear from all of you, too, at some point, and your suggestions. And again, we'd love to share your stories as well. We don't want this to be just a one-way street with our family, and nor do we assume we're going to have a monopoly on all the great stories. So we want to hear from you all as well. Which I guess, just to tie it all up, I did want to ask you, Danielle, why are the parks important, right? Why do you think this is important to you as a mom, you as a woman, you as and us as a family unit? What do you think? Why are they important at this stage for you?
Well, I found this whole year very exciting with the centennial of the national parks. So much excitement around the parks. So many people getting out and enjoying and visiting the parks, and all the press. And I've just loved hearing about it. We actually had started to have this idea even before the centennial began. Um, but for us and for me, being able to go out and really see our country, experience it, see it for myself, revisiting places I've been to and seeing new places and getting to enjoy it and see it through the eyes of our children. I just love when we go to a park and see their excitement and what interests them. Something that was really cool, which we'll talk about when we speak about Shenandoah, but my youngest helped to collect milkweed and to protect the monarch butterflies. And her dedication to this and commitment and determination to collect as much milkweed as possible, it was just really amazing. And I loved how involved she got. And she was really the workhorse.
And she worked like a dog, and it was hot out too. And we can't get her to pick up her clothes in her bedroom, but getting out in a field in Big Meadows down at Shenandoah, which we'll talk about.
For like 2 hours, she was so committed and dedicated. And that was just a small little trip that we took. And I just can't wait to see what will come in the future and in our future visits to whatever park we go to.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. I was just reflecting on this. So years ago, I must have been right out of college, or maybe a few years after that. My grandfather, who's still with us, actually, my grandfather was inquiring about why I was going abroad a bit. So I guess this was in a stage where if I had a couple extra dollars, I'd do whatever I could to go take a vacation, to go take a trip abroad. And my grandfather had the very old school notion of why are you going? Why are you going overseas? You should go see your own country. And I remember telling him, well, Grandpa, right now at this stage, when I'm a young guy, this is where I want to go, and I have a view of when I'm older and have a family. Then I want to introduce them. I even use the image of I want to load them up in the station wagon and take them out to see the national parks. And very rarely is, for me at least, a sentiment I had as a young guy turned out to be right, because usually I was just wrong about everything as a young guy. But that was one thing that it just kind of struck me then in talking with my grandfather, and we're following through on now. On the other hand, one thing I did not anticipate then, which I definitely feel now, and I don't know what this is, but more than ever, selfishly for me, I feel I need these parks. I need the outdoors. I need the break. I need to get the phone down and off, and hopefully not have reception. And I need to be with my family where we can kind of see the Milky Way, right? We can see the Milky Way. We can see an outstanding landscape. And for me, selfishly, it's food for my soul without being too metaphysical about it. So that's where, which I didn't anticipate as a 20-something-year-old and living in cities, and it was great. But now I just feel the need to get out. And I would Amir say, the mountains are calling me, so here I must go. I never really got that until now, that whether it's the mountains or the desert or the Key Biscayne seashore or the Virgin Islands, right? The coral is calling me, and I must go. This is just, for whatever reason, at this stage in my 40s now, this is just something that I feel. And, bolt onto that, the Parks Commission gig, bolt onto that, our hopes and dreams way back in 2002. And I guess this just is probably a pretty good place to stop. You boil this all together, and here we are with a podcast. We wanted to, and I guess with 2016 technology, we would love to share this with you all, and we hope you can share this with us. Again, we pretend to be no experts on the national parks. We pretend to have no monopoly on all the great stories and practices and what to do. We're just going to take a little slice of it from our perspective, be as open-minded as possible, and give you our experiences, and hopefully that helps you when you visit, and we can have a pretty good community around this. But I think with that, Danielle, I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to add.
I just wanted to add that we also hope to be interviewing people with great stories to share or experts, and we will all learn more about our national parks together.
I think that's right. So I think with that, we can sign off for now. As usual, for those of you who are podcast fans, please comment, like us on iTunes, Stitcher, all the usual venues that help get the word out. And stay tuned for more episodes from Everybody's National Parks. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.